It's great to see you all, and thank you all so much for joining us and for learning the Dharma and practicing and supporting the Dharma in this interesting time that we're living in. You know, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We are all realizing what that means. So I think you all know me, but maybe not. I'm Jan Chozen Bays, and I'm one of the teachers at Zen Community of Oregon. And I live at Great Vow Zen Monastery, where we've been chanting this chant every noon since the beginning of COVID.
And I'm Lama Lekshe, also known as Julia, if you know me outside of Dharma context. And I serve a Sangha in Portland called Dekeling, which means place of happiness. But for the last 8 months, I've lived here at Great Vow. My very good fortune to be here.
Yeah, our good fortune too. We have an extra teacher. So if the young people have a question, I just say, why don't you go ask Lekshe? So I'm going to just do a little introduction. How we discovered this sutra is it was sent to me by a man in Europe, somebody that I've never met in person, but for some reason sent it to me, and I played it and I thought it was beautiful. It was sent at the beginning of the lockdown due to COVID. It's a sutra in which the Buddha gives his chief disciple, Ananda, instructions for dispelling an epidemic in the city of Vaiśali, also called Vaisali. And we've been chanting it, as I said, every noon at the monastery since we got it. And tonight we're going to chant it twice. So we're going to chant it at the beginning with the recording, and you should be able to see the words, hopefully, if we get it all together. And then we'll talk about the sutra and give you some background. And then at the end, we'll chant it again. And we only chant half of it. On the text that you'll get in the link that was sent to you, you'll see that it's chanted twice. The first half is the instructions the Buddha gives to Ananda, and then the second half is the same thing, but Ananda is now carrying out the instructions. So it takes about a little over 9 minutes to chant halfway through. So we'll do that at the beginning, and then we'll do that at the end. And just some hints for chanting. You can just chant on one tone, but you'll hear the man who's made this recording going up a little bit and then coming down, gradually coming down back to the bass note. But you can just chant on the bass note, or if you hear some variations, make up your own variations. And you're gonna be muted, so it doesn't matter what you chant. Nobody can hear you. All of us can only hear the wonderful fellow who recorded it. If you haven't chanted it before, don't worry if you can't keep up with it. Some of the long mantra goes on, it's long, and just, try to catch up. If you get behind, that's fine. We all did that at the beginning. And don't worry if you can't pronounce it all. In all the words except one, each syllable is pronounced. So being is 2 syllables, and wandering is 3 syllables. Awakening is 4 syllables, right? The only word where that's not true is blessed one, the name of the Buddha, blessed one. Blessed is 1 syllable. But you'll catch on to that. If there's a line over a vowel, it means hold that syllable. On the top, if there's an overscore over, it just means hold it a little bit longer. And S, if it has a mark over it, becomes SH, like Vaisali becomes Vaiśali. So you'll catch on to that too. Then about halfway through the chant, there are some verses. And they have a little melody, which you'll catch on to. And all the pronouns are he, but you can substitute she or there, or you can alternate. I do the even ones he and the odd ones she. So just mess around with that as you wish. So are we ready to chant?
Yeah, let's try. I'm just going to test the audio to make sure that it works.
Okay.
And if we can get a thumbs up, we'll know that we'll be good to go.
Okay.
Okay.
And then you're going to put up the text.
Second.
I'm pretty sure they did this in the Buddha's time, after the Buddha's time, the early sutras. I'm pretty sure they got out their electronic devices and did all this, right?
Yeah, we should be good to go.
Okay.
So I will share my screen.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay. Are we ready? As soon as the sound starts, you can all chant.
Homage to all the Buddhas
Send bodhisattvas
thus
that
that I
I
hear
hear
at
at
one
one
time
time
the
the
blessed
blessed
one
one
was
was
residing
residing
in
at
Nandika.
Nandika.
Can they hear it?
Yes.
They're not hearing it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
They're not hearing it.
I'm sorry about that.
I could just hear Chozen.
Homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas thus that I hear at one time the blessed one was residing in Nandika at the impenetrable dwelling place. The blessed one said to the venerable Ananda, Ananda, let us proceed to the city of Vaiśali. Let us do so, O honored one, replied the venerable Ananda, assenting to what the blessed one had said. Thereupon the blessed one, traveling through the country of Riji, arrived in Vaiśali. In Vaisali, he stayed in Amrapali's grove. At that time the blessed one said to the venerable Ananda, Ananda, go to the city of Vaisali, place your foot on the threshold of the city gate, and utter these mantras and these verses. Visarata, 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 Visarata. The Buddha who has compassion for the world has spoken. This is the wish of all Buddhas. It is the wish of all Pratyekya Buddhas. It is the wish of all Arhats. It is the wish of all those undergoing training. It is the wish of all Shravakas. It is the wish of all who speak words of truth. It is the wish of the Dharma. It is the wish of Kameshvara. It is the wish of Brahma. It is the wish of Pratyekya Brahma. It is the wish of Indra. It is the wish of the gods. It is the wish of the Lord of the demigods. It is the wish of all demigods. It is the wish of the servants of the demigods. It is the wish of all Buddhas. Visarata, 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 Visarata. The Buddha who has compassion for the world has spoken. Munchata, Munchata, do not stay. The epidemic should cease. Nirgachata, 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 Nirgachata. The Buddha, the great God, the God of gods, the supreme God has arrived. The gods including Indra, the gods including Brahma, the gods including Ishana, the gods including Prajapati, and the four protectors of the world have come. Hundreds of thousands of gods, lords of the demigods, and hundreds of thousands of demigods have also come. Hundreds of thousands of Buddhas who have faith in the blessed one have also come for the sake of all living beings, and they have come to bring great harm to you. So Nirgachata, 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 Nirgachata. Disperse quickly those of you who have hateful thoughts. May you be destroyed. Those who have loving thoughts, who do not wish to sin but wish to protect beings. Stay and take on physical form. The Buddha who has compassion for the world has spoken. Somo, 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 somoro, 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 somoro. Moro 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 miri 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 moro 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 riti Mere 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 ti, esse mere mere ti, mere si me. Kankara kara kata kankara kara cha kankara 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 kankaro titiko visho kankara kankari shere herita fusware pore 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 punata nana tata ripo ripo nata ta nergacha nergacha ripo ripo nergacha palayata ripo ripo palayata. The Buddha who has compassion for the world, whose wish is to benefit all living beings, who abides in love, who is compassionate, who abides in joy, and who abides in equanimity, has arrived. Sipram Nirgachata Swaha. These mantras which were proclaimed to all the gods and all the Buddhas through the Buddha's supreme wisdom and truth will accomplish their purpose. These following verses will accomplish their purpose. He in whom all attachment and greed are conquered, all defilement gone. His mind is peace without harmful intent. He will bring you well-being. He who leads all worldly beings to tread the path of liberation, the teacher of all dharmas, he will bring you well-being, the teacher support of wandering beings, for the sake of every living creature, brings them all to master happiness. He will bring you well-being, the protector who with thoughts of love, for all these beings sustains them always, just as he would his only child. He will bring you well-being, he who in samsara has been, for all samsaric beings a support, an island and a friend. He will bring you well-being, he who has laid bare all phenomena, who is pure and free from deception, whose words are pure, whose very acts are purity. He will bring you well-being, this great hero who by taking birth with perfection attained his purpose and accomplished all his goals. He will bring you well-being, he whose birthright is whole earth, with all his forests shook and trembled, brought joy for every living creature. He will bring you well-being, he who caused on the seed of awakening the earth to quake in all six ways, and Mara to feel despair. He will bring you well-being, he who turning the wheel of the Dharma, pronounced the truths of the noble ones, and was extolled as a sage the Muni. He will bring you well-being, the alluring one who defeated all the extremists with the Dharma, and brought all assemblies under his influence. He will bring you well-being, may the Buddha bring you well-being, may Chakra and the gods bestow well-being, and may well-being from the Buddhas too be provided to you always by the Buddha's merit and power, and the wishes of the gods. May whatever goal you seek this very day be accomplished, to like beings be well, for like beings be well, when you set out be well, and when you return be well in the daytime, be well in the night, be well at midday too, may all of you be always well. May all of you know no evil, surrounded by 1,000 gods. The Buddha has arrived, so you with hateful thoughts disperse, and you whose nature is compassion stay. By the power of the true words of the Buddhas, Pratikya Buddhas, Aras, and those being trained, those who do harm to the world should be gone from the city. All sentient beings, all living creatures, all Buddhas and every one of you, may you have nothing but happiness. May you all be free from illness. May you all see what is good. May all of you know no evil. May whatever Buddhas are assembled here, all those who live upon the earth or in the sky, act always lovingly for human beings and practice Dharma day and night. To these instructions the Venerable Ananda replied, I will do so, O honored one. He went to Vaiśali as the Blessed One had instructed, and placing his foot on the threshold of the city gate, uttered these mantras and these verses, Visarata, 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 Visarata.
And can we share?
My particular favorite is two-legged beings be well, four-legged beings be well. In the kitchen we were saying today, and how about six-legged beings be well and eight-legged beings be
And
well?
100-legged beings.
Yeah.
Anything else to say, Roshi, on the introduction part of this?
No, let's go on.
Okay. So Chozen Roshi got this sutra, and we clicked on the links and did some reading, and had the good fortune of meeting this man whose photograph is in the upper left-hand corner. And at that time he was in Bodena studying to be a translator. And his name, I just want to be sure I get it right, is Rodrigo Reyes. And he's a father, single father. He's a musician, a translator. And again, he has this website whose link you see here where you can find, he doesn't do these translations, but it's from a project called the 84,000. And so they're translating so many documents, and you can see their progress. And I wrote him a letter, and not that you could read it on the screen right now, but I'll send you these slides tomorrow. And you can read this very sweet letter that he wrote back. And both my Sangha and the Great Vow community sent him offerings, and he wrote back and was very happy to receive them and happy to be a part of your using and learning this sutra. So he said in his first email to me, you are also fulfilling my deepest wish. Thank you so much.
So this is called a sutra, and Lekshe will explain a little bit more about what a sutra is, but it's important to know that in the time of the Buddha, there was no written language for his teachings, so it was all completely oral transmission. And it was only about 500 years after the Buddha died that anything that he taught was written down. And this may seem peculiar to us at this time, that nothing had been written down and it was only an oral tradition. But people at that time were trained in memories and having a good memory, and also they trusted the oral tradition better than anything written down, and most people were literate. So it depended on memorization, constant repetition, communal recitation, where large groups would chant together, which helps. So if one person goes off, wanders off, the rest of the group can keep the chant on and keep true to the words of the sutra. There are various mnemonic devices, so you may notice when you read sutras, original sutras, that there's a lot of repetition, or also numbers, 4 of these and 6 of these, and that was to help with memorization. And then different ordained people specialized in memorizing different sutras. So people would go to them to get the original text. It was the reason that they passed from the oral tradition to writing down what the Buddha had taught in Pali. This occurred in Sri Lanka. And this was, as I said, 500 years after the Buddha's death. And there was a 12-year famine, drought and famine, and also constant invasions from the southern end of India. And the monks who were dependent on begging for food were dying out. Large numbers were dying. And so the elders decided that it was important now to finally write down the Pali Sutras. And you can actually go to the cave in Sri Lanka where this was done. Hogan and I have visited there, and so has Kodo. So they gathered the 500 in the Pali Canon means a lot of people. They gathered 500, the best reciters, and they brought them to this cave, and they worked day and night to write down the Pali Canon on palm leaves. And the name of the cave is Aluvihara, which means cave of light, because apparently it was lighted all through the night as they labored to keep on writing and get this done before the other monks began to die out. So it was written down on palm leaves, and you can still see how this is done when you go to Sri Lanka, to the Cave of Light. And you can see in this slide, these long, narrow palm leaves that are cut off and treated, so they'll last. And then they use a stylus. There's no ink in the stylus. They write the words just by pressing into the palm leaves, and then they put on an ink made of soot that fills up the grooves, and then they wipe it off. And so that's how these are written. And then they're strung together with a string through 1 or 2 holes. And then they usually have wooden end boards. So you can see these beautiful end boards from Sri Lanka. Up at the top left, it starts with the Buddha's birth, and then leaving the palace with Chana, and the chariot, crossing the river, becoming a mendicant, teaching, meeting his teachers, meditating, finding the Bodhi tree down at the bottom on the left, sitting under the Bodhi tree, becoming enlightened, and then teaching his first disciples who recognize his wisdom, and then going on to teach with his disciples. And then on this side, he's lying down at the time of his death between the sala trees. So the library, there was a library at the Aluvihara, so from 500 years after the Buddha's death, that held the original palm leaf inscriptions that the monks wrote that long ago, from the year 100 to the year 1858. So 1,700 years they were kept. And then there was a rebellion against the British rule, and in the conflict, the library was burned down in 1858. The Lekshe is going to tell you a little bit more about what a sutra is.
So it's very interesting, this word sutra, which in Sanskrit, and I know that many of you know this, but for me, some of these things were new. This word sutra in Sanskrit originally meant string or thread. And at first I found that also very interesting because Tantra, the tradition that I practice in, is yu, which also means string or thread. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this reason. So Roshi told about how those, you can see these books, you can see the strings and the threads, how they were held together. And when I first looked at this, I remembered one night at the Dharma Center where a translator friend of mine had a stack, a modern day sutra like this. And he had just finished translating it, and it was all in Tibetan. And someone walked by and the edge of her shawl caught it, and it went flying across the room. And he looked so forlorn. And so when we picked it up and the lady left, I said, "You look pretty sad." And he said, "I hadn't gotten to the page numbers yet." So he had to pick up hundreds of pages of these. Actually, it was more than one sutra put together. And so I don't know if this sutra you're looking at has page numbers or not. But sutra is a Sanskrit word meaning string or thread. And now we just use it to mean the discourses of the Buddha, of course, Shakyamuni Buddha. It's interesting that it is the same root, verbal root, as the English word suture. Suture. And I just thought that's kind of fun since Roshi was a physician. Hopefully she didn't have to suture too many kids. There's a lot of speculation among the scholars. I've heard several different explanations about the word string and scripture. And generally they run along the lines that these were oral teachings that were stitched together around a common theme. And then also that the thread of that, the meaning of that thing went through generations. So that seems to be the main feel of that. And I thought it was so interesting to learn, and this I've known for a while, but I still am impressed by it, that originally these were just chanted from memory. And I know at the monastery where I study in India, in Mantric, which is not far from Vaiśali actually, that you can still today hear little children shouting out the sutras. I once passed a little boy in the hallway in the basement. He was 5 years old, and he had a sutra on a blanket, and he was just shouting at the top of his lungs. And I said, "What are you doing?" I asked him in Nepali, and he said, "Sutra, S-U-T-R-A, Sutra." That was pretty good. So the sutras, are collected in the second part of the Buddhist canon that is known as the Tripitaka, or three baskets, the precepts, the sutras, and the commentaries. And most of them begin with the phrase, "Thus I have heard," meaning I think I heard this with my own ears. And in this case of this sutra, this is Ananda speaking directly. So I heard, and the miracle to me is not that he heard, but that he remembered this whole thing. So at the first Buddhist council convened following the Buddha's death, then Ananda is said to have recited from memory all of the Buddha's discourses. And so Chozen will tell you a little bit more about him if you haven't yet learned about Ananda. It's quite a fascinating person. So in every sutra, what you can expect to find is a description of the circumstances. So what was going on when someone asked for this teaching? Often it says who asked for it. I just recently finished studying a sutra called the Sutra of the Householder Uncouth. And so I thought, well, I'm surprised they called the householder uncouth. That doesn't seem very nice, but it turns out that was his name, Mr. Uncouth. So let's see, it tells the time of year often, or the place, and those kinds of details. So a very rich storytelling means, and also, of course, Dharma teaching. And usually sutras are full of parables and allegories. And like Chozen said, they have lots of repetition because it's difficult to remember something that unfolds over 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that. So let's see, I think we studied that. And maybe we talked about this. So I'm going to move my camera here. In the Pali Canon of the Theravadan tradition, the sutras are divided into 5 collections. So you might have heard about the Nikayas, that's those 5 collections. And then along with those, many Mahayana sutras have also been preserved. So originally they were composed in Sanskrit. And then as they moved around, you can find them in Tibetan, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and so forth. This particular sutra is still chanted today in many Tibetan monasteries, not just for pandemics, but anytime there is obstacle or difficulty of some kind, this sutra is brought out and chanted even today. And so tomorrow I'll send you the Tibetan version of this sutra. It's just actually 2 pages long, and you can read it and see if you read Tibetan. So what's the structure of this particular sutra? They're all structured in a similar way, but each one a little bit different. So as you read this sutra, what you heard, first of all, were commands to non-human beings to depart. And then in order to put some oomph behind that, the authority of other beings other than human was invoked. And then after that section, there's that very long mantra that went with the sumu, sumu, sumuru, sumuru, that mantra. That mantra can't be, as many mantras can't, translated into some meaningful paragraph. And so there was a thought, or there is a thought in the way we teach this in the Tibetan tradition, that the sutra carries its own vibrational power. And for me, this is very easy to understand. When I was a little girl, my mom used to read to me. We owned one book, and it was the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. And how that came to be our only book, we didn't have any kids' books, I don't know. But she read me his poetry, and it had very beautiful cadence. And because she was a good reader, I could tell when it was meant to be a kind of forbidding, or I was meant to really perk up my ears and listen. And so we think that the sutras have some sort of vibrational power, and different people in different cultures have different thoughts about this. But if you have recited sutras, I think that you will come to have your own experience of that, and perhaps even based on your own experience, what that means, that power. And then there are the svastigata verses. So the gata means these chants, and svasti means auspicious. And so at the end of many, many sutras and many Tibetan texts as well, we find these verses. They're called tashi, which means good fortune in Tibetan. And these are addressed primarily, but not exclusively, to the human inhabitants. And so you could say that it's a kind of, the recitation of this is a kind of blessing. And I know each day when we read this at lunch, I feel blessed. And then I'm with Chozen. I like the part about the two-legged and the four-legged beings. And I also like to imagine the legless beings and the many-legged beings. And in these, we are invoking, of course, compassion and wisdom, pure mind, and all sorts of spiritual power. And some of those elements in the sutra, of course, belong to more than one of those categories. So this is a map of India, and I'm wanting to know, I'm going to look at my other screen and so I can see your faces. Can you raise your hand if you can actually see the detail of this map? Some of you at least can read it, because I think it's kind of interesting. So just above the center of this map, I made a brown arrow that points to Bihar. So this whole area is India. And many of these places you'll be familiar with. Perhaps you've traveled there, or perhaps you hear about cities like Delhi, or maybe you've heard of strife, political strife in Jammu Kashmir, which is up at the top. So where we're looking at is India, and then kind of in the middle of India, up and to the right, you see a land base that's about as big as Oregon, cut in half and pulled longwise. That's Nepal. And there in red, you can see the city, capital city of Kathmandu. And then you see the range of the Himalaya, and that would be the home of Mount Everest. North of that, you will see the autonomous region of Tibet, which is sometimes called part of China. I think of it differently. I think of it as an autonomous country unto itself. But there's China, and China goes on, of course, quite high. And then south of Bihar, you can see the Bay of Bengal. So you see that area is all surrounded by water. In Bihar, which is right on the border, so if you look north of the northern border of that country, you'll see Darjeeling. And if you then look a little bit up and to the left, you'll see Kathmandu. So just to get you oriented a little bit, Vaiśali was there in that small place. And indeed, it's still a city. You could visit it. There's also Patna, which I have been visited, and Nalanda, which you might know for its very famous university. And so real place, and take a look at a good Google map after class and find Vaiśali and Google it and learn about the city, what it was in the past and what it is today. So if you were to travel there, and there are many ruins of sacred places, pilgrimage sites, still in India. Here we can see the stupa of Ananda, and you can see it's pretty much intact. I think it looks quite good. Wouldn't surprise me if this is a World Heritage site, I don't know. But this vertical that we see with the lion, the Singha on top, is one of Ashoka's pillars. So one of the few standing pillars. I think I saw one in Lumbini when I was there 2 years ago too, but not quite sure if it was a pillar or a monument to the pillar. And then there you see the pond, and I don't know if this kind of pond is for sacred activity or if it's for the everyday use of, as was done in ancient India.
What I read is that anytime anybody was elected to an office,
Yeah.
like a government office,
Yeah.
they would be bathed in that pool.
Oh, that's so precious, huh? So really beautiful. I know in Lumbini, when you go to visit a place like this, you remove your shoes because you're walking on holy ground. And I don't know why, but I was so touched by that, to remove my shoes and take them off with everyone else. And with my barefoot, we walked to the place of the Buddha. It's a lovely, beautiful journey. So Roshi, who is this?
This is Ananda. Well, this is a statue of Ananda because we don't actually know what he looked like, but he looks pretty sweet in this statue. So Ananda was the Buddha's first cousin. Some people say he was born about the same time as the Buddha, but the Buddha died at 80 and Ananda lived 20 more years, so probably they weren't born at the same time. Other people say that he was born on the Buddha's enlightenment, which happened when the Buddha was in his 20s. So we don't know the exact dates, but he was definitely the first cousin of the Buddha and one of the Buddha's 10 principal disciples. And he had a what's called a phonographic memory. So at that time, people were very well trained in memorizing things because everything was oral, but he was exceptional. And when the Buddha was about 55, he asked to have another personal assistant. And Ananda didn't volunteer, but when the Buddha asked him, would you like to be my personal assistant? Ananda said yes. And the Buddha said, well, why didn't you say so? And he said, well, it's up to the Buddha who he chooses. So then Ananda agreed, but he had several conditions. One of his conditions was that he would get nothing in recompense, no material compensation. So he couldn't be accused of wanting to do this for the money or whatever compensation he got. And that if he was separated from the Buddha when the Buddha taught, then the Buddha would recite to him whatever he had taught so that Ananda could memorize it later. And after the Buddha died, there was a council soon after to try to put together what they felt the Buddha had actually taught, to try to clarify that. Because, of course, if someone dies, as we all know, even in our own families, divisions naturally occur. And so the monks and nuns gathered to try to establish what they felt would be true to what the Buddha taught. And they depended on Ananda. Ananda was asked to recite what he recalled, what the Buddha had taught, to check for accuracy in any other versions that had developed. And they all decided Ananda's were the most authentic. And most of the "thus I have heard" refers to Ananda, meaning I, Ananda, was there, or I heard it from the Buddha after the Buddha taught it. He taught it to me a second time, and I memorized it. Ananda is also beloved by women in the practice because he helped convince the Buddha that women could be practitioners, serious practitioners, and should be ordained. So this event also occurred in Vaiśali. The Vaiśali was very important at certain important times in the Buddha's life. And what had happened is that the Buddha's aunt and foster mother, because the Buddha's mother died soon after his birth, and he was raised by his aunt, Mahapajapati, she came to Vaiśali with a large group of women. Again, they say 500, we don't know how many, but a lot. And they walked 300 miles barefoot to come to ask the Buddha to ordain them. And it said that they arrived covered with dust. They had shaved their heads, and they had made some robes and put them on, and then walked all the way to see the Buddha. And I guess they looked pretty pitiful because Ananda took pity on them. They asked the Buddha to ordain them, and traditionally you ask 3 times, and each time the Buddha said, no, Mahapajapati, please do not ask this of me, which is something very interesting to contemplate. I think he had enough trouble keeping track of the men that he thought, oh gosh, I just can't take on a whole nother group. That's my interpretation of this. Please do not ask this of me. So he refused, and the women were very downcast. But then Ananda asked the Buddha, isn't it true that women can attain the Dhamma and discipline? Meaning that they can practice, that's the discipline of practice, and attain awakening. And the Buddha said yes. And then Ananda said, well then, why would you deny that to them, this opportunity to practice that they're begging for? Also, he reminded the Buddha of the fact that this woman, Mahapajapati, had cared for him when he was an infant and a young boy, a young child, and that he owed something to her for that generosity. So often there are ceremonies. There's a particular ceremony in Soto Zen, which I haven't been, it's kind of a secret ceremony, and I haven't been able to obtain it yet, but it's done by only women, and it's thanking Ananda for advocating for them with the Buddha. And he was praised, he was known for being very devoted, for being very compassionate, for being a very good teacher. So if the Buddha couldn't accept an invitation later on, sometimes he would send Ananda to do the teaching. And he was beloved by the Buddha. So we can go on to the next one.
So thank you for sharing that story. It's so beautiful, and as Ananda, I appreciate Ananda so much. Brave fellow who interceded for all of us. We will all be a woman sooner or later, so nice to have that advocacy. So let's talk a little bit about the historical context of this sutra. You heard the words when we were reading the sutra, the blessed one. So this is Buddha, referring to Buddha. He was in Nadika at the impenetrable dwelling place. So I've read and read and read, and you can read and read and read too. Lots of people have different ideas about exactly what was there. Some say it was bricks, some say it was a thicket. There's all kinds of ideas. But that sutra begins, and the Blessed One said to the Venerable Ananda, go to the city of Vaiśali. So one thing that's interesting, and in the document you got when you registered and maybe haven't taken a look at it yet, but you'll get again tomorrow, is that what we know about this sutra, other than the text of the sutra itself, is pieced together from many different perspectives, many different scholars looking at many partial documents. And so what I'm saying provisionally as a student of those scholars. Of course, I'm not sure we know exactly for sure what happened, but the feel of it is that it was very late in the Buddha's life, and the Buddha and his disciples, of course, they were walking, were on their final journey north before, close to the end of the Buddha's life. And they were staying in Rajgiri under the patronage of a king whose name was Ajatasattu. And they were staying there, enjoying this. Chozen will tell you a little bit more about the place where they stayed and who else was staying there. And a messenger came and asked to have an audience with the Buddha. And he came from Vaiśali. And he said to the Buddha, there's an epidemic in Vaiśali, and people are really dying, and we're begging you, please will you come and cure this epidemic? And the Buddha did at that moment a very interesting thing. He turned and asked King Ajatasattu, his host, should I go? Should I go? And so I poked around a little bit because I was curious. People are dying and you're the Buddha. Why would you ask? But what I read in one story was that the king of the area of Vaiśali and King Ajatasattu were in conflict with one another. And so I suppose the Buddha knew that. And I thought that it was beautiful that he gave King Ajatasattu the opportunity to have the kindness and the generosity to say, yes, please go, even though those two principalities were at war with each other. I thought that was just, yet another sign of the wisdom of the Buddha and a good teaching. I felt inspired by that. So they made their way, they arrived, and there was another epidemic on the way. So I don't know if this was just a bad time in India or if in that time in India, epidemics were common. But I've been thinking about this epidemic and listening to Chozen Roshi teach and other doctors and other Dharma teachers, and I'm really feeling blessed because this is the first epidemic. This is the first epidemic that's been close to home for me. And yet when Chozen Roshi did a teaching on the history of epidemics in the world, I saw that we have been luxuriously free. And it's not as though we've never had them. We had the Great Flu, we had polio, we've had some other things. But I didn't ever recall hearing of a story that on the way to one epidemic, you would find a different one, completely different disease, the story I read said. And so I was feeling blessed, and it's that kind of blessing that maybe you don't really know or think about it until it's already happening. So I just wanted to let you know, because I doubt Chozen will mention it, she's pretty modest. There's a beautiful teaching by her on YouTube about the pandemic, and it details some history that can let us know that the epidemic really in one way is a normal thing that's been happening. So they made their way, they were teaching all along the way, so going as quickly as you could go on foot, but of course when someone like the Buddha was going somewhere, I'm sure he wanted to, and I'm sure many people asked for teachings. So during that journey, when they found this other epidemic, not the one in Vaiśali, several of the Buddha's followers passed away. They caught the disease and died. And it was at that time that the Buddha delivered one of his famous teachings on the 12 interdependent links of causation. So that will help you fit that story into this story. So they went to Vaiśali, and Ananda did exactly as he was told. And I think that's even, that little snippet is a beautiful teaching on its own. It says in the Sutra, he did exactly that thing. Different scholars say this differently, but in the commentary that we're reading, the Buddha, it's translated as the Buddha saying, put your foot on the threshold. And I think about how careful we are going inside grocery stores and coffee shops and things these days. And I thought that was kind of the Buddha to just say, put your foot on the threshold. And of course, since place doesn't really matter, they probably could have cured this epidemic from anywhere, but they went to Vaiśali. So that epidemic was cured, was quelled. And there are several accounts of that. But this gives us a chance to think about what is an epidemic and what does it mean for an epidemic to be cured. And like all of Buddhist teachings, this can be understood, of course, in so many levels. But as I think about all experience arising as my mind, and of course I'm teaching from a Tibetan perspective here, not even actually arising as my mind, but as arising in mind, then I know that epidemic is a mind state. And though, of course, I would never say this to someone who has a disease of some kind, in my own way of thinking, it's a mind state. And so, of course, since it came together through causes and conditions, it could also come apart through causes and conditions.
in the Japanese version of this sutra and this chant, they mentioned that the dead were stacked up everywhere in Vaisali. There were dead bodies everywhere, and that there had been a drought, and then a famine, and then this epidemic, and that after Ananda did as the Buddha said and chanted this sutra and all of the mantras, a rainstorm came and washed all the bodies away and washed the city clean, which is a kind of nice image too, both for the city of Vaiśali, for our world now, and also for our mind.
So beautiful, huh? Imagine, 1,000 bodies in India. So I've traveled quite a bit in India in the last 30 years, and that would not be a pleasant sight. That would wake you up, I think.
I think so.
So who was this person, Amrapali, chosen?
Amrapali's grove. So Amrapali is a very interesting person. She was a foundling, so they don't know who her parents were. And she was discovered by the ruler of the Lichavis. So Vaiśali was in the kingdom of the Lichavis. And he discovered her and called her Amba, which means mango, and Pali, which means line, because she was discovered under a mango tree. So she was named for the mango tree. And she grew up to be a renowned beauty, like Cleopatra, let's say, or Helen of Troy. And many princes, even though they could have many wives, wanted to marry her. And they began quarreling, and it became so disruptive in the kingdom that the ruler decided to make her a property of the state. So she was a courtesan, not a prostitute in the usual sense, but somebody of great wit and great intelligence, and there for everyone to enjoy. She was a very wise woman, and she was able to keep peace among these quarreling princes, some of whom you can see in the chariot up there. And she was also a very generous benefactor. She was really akin to a queen without being married to the ruler. So there's a very interesting story about Amrapali, or Amrapali, according to the translation, and it's related to the two chariots passing each other. So when the Buddha was traveling on his final journey, as Lekshe said, he stopped in Vaiśali and rested at Amrapali's mangrove grove park. And she was so inspired by his teaching that she invited him and his followers to dinner the next night. And that was a common custom, that people would invite the Buddha and his retinue to dinner. She left in her chariot to hurry back home to make the preparations. And then she was met by the princes who were coming to hear the Buddha. She was going the opposite direction, and they stopped her and they said, "What's the hurry?" And she said the Buddha accepted her invitation to dinner, and she was hurrying home to prepare. And they were really disappointed, and they offered her 100,000 gold coins to give the Buddha to them for dinner. And she said, "I would not trade for all the treasure in Vaisali." So the disappointed princes, it said in the sutra, in the Pali Canon, they snapped their fingers and they said, "We've been tricked. We've been defeated by that mango lass." So after the Buddha came to have dinner with her, she offered the mango grove to the Buddha and his disciples. And she had a son. She actually had a son, even though she never married anybody, by King Bimbisara of another kingdom. And her son became a monk. And upon hearing him preach, she decided to ordain as a nun. And her meditation subject was the impermanence of the body. And eventually she was enlightened. And you can find in the Therigatha, T-E-R-A or T-H-E-R-A, the poems of the women's disciples of the Buddha, the poem that she composed late in life, where she talks about, "I used to have the silken black tresses that were glossy and curly, and now they're all matted and like a dog's fur. And my breasts used to be perky and beautiful, and now they hang down to my waist. And it's a very interesting poem. And I can post it for you if you want to read it. So that's her story, and how she, hearing the Buddha preach, or hearing her son preach, became a follower of the Buddha.
Such a beautiful story. And that Kise has been doing teachings on those poems from a book called The First Free Women, who are all nuns. And I think all acknowledged to probably have been awakened people at some point.
Yes.
In their life, and her teachings on those, Kise's teachings on those, are very beautiful. I hope you get to hear some of those. All right, here's some folks you should get to know. In sutras, and in both this kind of sutra, in the sutras in the Tibetan tradition, you always call in so many kinds of beings. And I can remember on long retreat, I spent so much time when I got a sutra looking up, what is this kind of being? What is that kind of being? But it's really powerful once you get the hang of this sutra and you can recite it without looking at the text, or only sometimes looking at the text. I encourage you to, at different times of recitation, rest your awareness on the invocation of different kinds of beings. So this is a wonderful way to expand our limited view of what beingness means and who beings are in our experience. And I think that right now, in this time of racism, classism, sexism, ageism, I think it's very important to do whatever we can do to expand our awareness of all kinds of beings. And sometimes, if we're talking about beings as described by those who experience them from another culture and or another time, we really have to stretch. And I think that stretching is good for us. So in this, this is just some of the beings you'll hear referenced. There were arhats, and some of you will know these, of course, very well. But some of these might be new words for you. An arhat is someone who has completely overcome the kleshas, completely overcome mental afflictions. So they're very, through practice, very calm. There's also Bhuttas. I really love Bhuttas because I lived in Nepal for 3.5 years and everybody talks about Bhuttas. But these are spirits or ghosts, and they can be malevolent or positive. And many, many times in a month, people in my house in Nepal would make offerings to the Bhuttas. So that was one of the first others that I learned about. And then Brahma, of course, whose name you might have heard. And then we hear so that's gods, but then there's also this class demigods. And sometimes the demigods are referred to as asuras. You might have heard that word. And asuras sometimes are jealous or disruptive in God realms for various reasons, mischievous. And then I want to talk, just so that you have a sense, I want to introduce you to these people at the bottom. These are my friends. They're known as the 4 great kings, and we invoke them in this sutra. And since they're friends, I thought that I would introduce you and you could know them a little bit better. So the 4 great kings in Tibetan are called Gyalchen Deji. So Gyal means king, and Chen means big or great or huge, and Ji is 4. So they are the king 4 of, the king big of 4, otherwise the 4 great kings. They're known as the guardians of the 4 cardinal directions. If you're reading or studying, sometimes you'll hear them referred to as the 4 protectors of the world, or even the guardians of the universe. In Tibetan, when they're called the guardians of the universe, they're referred to as the Jigten Kongwa. So 4 gods, 4 deities, and in the Tibetan cosmology, the center of the universe is a place called Mount Meru, and it's in the heaven of the 4 great kings, and these 4 people and their constituents live on the lower slopes of that mountain, and they guard the 4 cardinal directions. Each one of them is a leader of a different kind of semi-divine beings. So each of these beings made a wish at the time of the Buddha Kashapya. And the 4 guardian kings were then reborn again in the time of the Buddha Shakyamuni, and each of them uphold and teach the Dharma in their own realm. And in the Tibetan tradition, 3 different times in the month, we say that these 4 kings also go around and they survey the 4 directions, and what they're looking for is any kind of harm that's coming to the Dharma itself or the practitioners of the Dharma. And so they are the protectors of our practice. So when we did our long retreat, on each of the gates, each cloister had plaques of the 4 protectors, the 4 great kings, and 3 times a month we made offerings to them. The way that I came to understand this was 3 times a month was in no way too often for me to check in with my own discipline, to check in with my own mind states, to check in with my heart, and to see, was I supporting the Dharma or was I obstructing the Dharma? And so if I was obstructing, then I would say, whatever help there is, the 4 protectors of the world, 4 great kings, whatever it is, I invoke that. And it was really also a way, I happened to have the sense that there was someone out there, not quite like your imaginary friends, but I did feel a protective presence in my experience. But it also was just a ritual for reminding me the greatest obstacles to my retreat always came from my own mind, my own heart. So I'll tell you their names just because they have kind of fun names. Yul Korsung is the defender of the East, and Yul Korsung just means the defender of the area. Pak Kyepo means noble birth. He's the defender of the South. Chen Mi Zhang. Now, I don't know the story of this, and I haven't had time to look it up since retreat, but Chen means eye, and Mi Zhang means ugly. So he's ugly eyes, and who knows why that is. And then Nam Tuse is the son of he who heard many things in the north. And each of them has an instrument, one a musical instrument and sword and so forth, and each of them does different kinds of protection. But each of these beings that we're calling in can be studied in great depth. And even more important, I think, than studying them is to understand that they represent an aspect of mind, an aspect of being. And so you're familiarizing yourself with mind in general and your own mind in particular, your heart. And I think in the beginning for me, it's very helpful to put it outside myself because what we say in Tibetan, you should ride the horse you're on. And so when I want to know about powerful things or difficult things, I like to think that those are outside myself. So that worked for me to put them outside myself.
I like their little shoes.
I know they have fabulous shoes, and you could have a pair of those shoes. If you go to Kathmandu, you can have a tailor make you a pair. I once traded a pair of those shoes for a down jacket when I was in Tibet in the 70s.
The 4 kings, if you're ordained, like Janine is, you sew an okesa, a big robe of the Buddha, and on the 4 corners you put 4 squares, which are called the 4 kings, 4 protective kings for your spiritual life, because you're wrapping yourself in that okesa every morning.
Isn't that it's beautiful how the meaning, even in our clothes, unfolds as years go by and we hear various storytellers. May I encourage you always to write those things down because they're so easily lost also. So we also invoke Indra, Ishana, Kameshvara, the Lord of Desire. I think that's a great one to invoke. Mara, Prajapati, and Pratyeka Buddhas. These are interesting. These are beings who attained liberation only through their own effort and contemplation, but they don't have the merit and the blessing to be able to teach others. Chakra. And it goes on and on the list. Those are all defined for you in the glossary of the commentary that you got when you registered and will get again tomorrow. So again, one of the benefits of doing this practice is that you will be daily creating the experience for yourself of awareness of beings who are unlike yourself and perhaps even unlike people you know. That's a pretty good practice to be doing in 2020. So some of these mantras, many of you have done a lot of mantra practice. Some of you might not have done any. Roshi will talk a little bit about it after this slide, how to do it. But there's some unusual mantras here. They can't always be translated, or sometimes we say in our tradition, they shouldn't always be translated. We should let them just be sound arising and just have faith and confidence that they accomplish something. But you know, we're human beings, we like to try to translate them. So visarata means disperse. And here, dispersing means to be pacified, to be quelled. So we're asking the causes of this or any obstruction to be quelled. And the causes of obstruction are always in the mind. In fact, in the Tibetan tradition, we say that pandemics in particular are caused by dun. And dun are elemental spirits who are upset when we disrespect the four elements. So I don't know if you could imagine that or fit it into your paradigm, but for me, it's been very easy to think, now there's a pandemic, I have been disrespecting the elements. And so when I walk across the meadow here, I remind myself, I am responsible for the disruption of these elements. I should walk respectfully. I should acknowledge that other beings live here. You know, before it was Great Bow, it was Chinook Indians. I think that maybe the Tlaxcalite tribe took it over from the Chinooks, but somebody always precedes us. And so that respect and that acknowledgement is so helpful. Then there's Munchata, looks like Munkata, but it's Munchata. Move, move, move. I think this is like when your mom said, come on, hurry up. So a sense of urgency. Sipram Nirgachata Svaha. So Sipram Nirgachata means depart quickly, and Svaha, which is common in many mantras, means may it be so, or so be it. And then Nirgachata, depart. The long mantra has some of these words in it, but every scholarly assessment I read of this so far has said it's not possible to translate that mantra. And in fact, one of the things that you'll see as you work with this is that long mantra is recorded quite differently, maybe 6 or 7 words differently in different translations. So tomorrow we will send you a different translation that accords slightly closer to the music, the way that the musician did it. Also, if you do speak Tibetan and you're studying this in the Tibetan translation of a Tibetan text, you will see that Swaha is always pronounced Soha, and that's just an accent. It's like a Texan accent of Asian languages, so it's nothing more than that. Okay, Roshi, teach us a little bit about mantra, and then we'll bring it home by reciting this again.
Well, I was never trained to do anything but face the wall, lower my gaze, and count my breath to 10. And if I didn't get to 10, start all over again.
Yay, Zen.
That was my complete training. But I discovered mantra practice actually when I was practicing with Jizo Bodhisattva, because we have a Dharani, which is a little bit longer than a traditional mantra for Jizo. So I began learning about mantra practice. Mantra literally means a mind guard, something to guard the mind, to protect against the disease of what I often call mind poisoning. We've all met people whose minds are poisoning them from inside, and sometimes we feel like we're poisoned by our own mind, especially at times like this when all the news is so distressing. The news can create mind poisoning. Mind poisoning is the kind of spinning thoughts that we can't stop and lead to suffering for ourselves and for others, and just add suffering to the world rather than decreasing the amount of suffering in the world. And so it's this tangle of thoughts that obscures our open, clear, equanimitous, natural mind. And the Buddha spoke it up about different kinds of practices. And one of the practices he directly mentions is what we would call substitution practice. So if you are caring for a toddler and the toddler heads for the electric outlet with something metal like a key, yeah, something harmful, you pick them up and you put them down with crayons in another room. Something that's beneficial to them and to their body and mind. So it's the same thing, that when we discover our mind is headed in a dangerous direction, and fortunately our practice gives us the awareness to discover when that's happening, when we start to feel jealous like the Asuras, or we start to feel judgmental, or our equanimity is disturbed and we get anxious and fearful, that's the time you can do substitution practice. So you pick up your mind and you put it down in something else beneficial, like loving kindness practice or like a mantra. It's part of mind training, which is exactly the work of our practice. Mind training. The Buddha talked about it all the time. So to concentrate the mind on a mantra instead of our self-centered thoughts is a start in moving our mind state towards a quiet mind of awareness and towards opening into the vast, clear mind of what we call our original nature. It's the exact opposite of believing that all of your thoughts are important and that you are the center of the world. And not only are you constantly thinking about yourself, but you also think that everybody else is thinking about you. Very common among young people. So when would you do mantra practice? You know, some people wearing a mala, which is intended to count your mantras, like a rosary. So the traditional mala has 108 beads for 108 recitations, because there are 108 afflictions of the mind traditionally that are named. And so if you chant the mantra 108 times, you're helping to antidote those 108 afflictions of the mind as they arise, or before they arise. These days, everybody and their brother and sister has some kind of mala around their wrist. And I'm not even sure most people know what it's for. But what it's for is to help you with concentration, with paying attention to this moment, this breath, or this recitation of the mantra. So when the mind becomes turbulent and you recognize it, you can substitute mantra. One of my students was a Zen student for many years and then began Tibetan practice, spent a whole weekend on mantra practice. And she said that after the day and a half, it was no longer her reciting the mantra was doing her. And that's what the sixth ancestor described in the Platform Sutra, when he talks about, instead of us doing the Dharma, something turns, the mysterious pivot turns, and the Dharma begins doing us. The Dharma turns us. So instead of us turning the Dharma wheel turns us. So mantra practice can be very, very helpful. And as we've been chanting this, I've thought of some different ways to work with it. Of course, the chanting eventually enters your own being and works its way into your view. And it will reveal itself in flashes at appropriate times. It's very interesting how it'll pop out. One of the ways that I've practiced with it is imagining myself on the threshold, standing on the threshold of a home of someone that I love or care for, or somebody that I'm anxious about, anxiety being a negative form of love. And chanting this sutra as I chanted for anything that plagues them. So it could be COVID, lockdown, depression, loss of jobs, addiction. So while I'm chanting the mantra and imagining that I'm standing on their threshold, I'm asking that their afflictions be dispelled, whether they're physical or mental afflictions. And that, to me, has been a very interesting way to practice sometimes with this mantra. In the Japanese translation of this mantra, instead of the Buddha asking Ananda to go stand on the threshold of the city gate, he asked him to go stand on the threshold of every house in the city, chant all of this whole mantra, this whole sutra. So you can imagine that might have taken, in a large city, it might have taken a while to go to each house. But that's what inspired me to think of each house that might need help. You know, as you know, we all know mantras like Om Mani Padme Hum. Many mantras begin with Om, which is the sound of the universe, the sound that everything is singing throughout the universe. And Swaha, as Lekshe mentioned, means so be it, or isn't it true, or isn't it wonderful? There are different translations of it, kind of rejoicing that you've done this practice. So I encourage you to practice this, and then snatches of it will come to you. I find when I'm in the kitchen, I'm going, Nisargata, Nisargata, Nisargata. Or the part I love is, may two-legged beings be well, may four-legged beings be well, or may you be well in the daytime, may you be well at night, and may you be well in the midday too. So various pieces of it will come to you, and in little flashes, and then you can chant out loud if it's appropriate, or quietly inside yourself.
Thank you so much for that. So always when you get a Dharma instruction like she just gave, it's really wonderful to put it right into action, as Ananda did. So we'll do that. We'll chant this sutra again. And you can do, of course, whatever you want. But one of the things I like to do after learning about a sutra is let all of that go now. Let all of that conceptual part rest, and only keep enough conceptual activity to read the sutra. And then what Roshi was describing, the sutra will work on you. And if you have time, so this is not like a homework assignment or anything, but if you have time sometime to set aside 2 or 3 hours or a day to read the sutra over and over and over again with very little break, it's quite magical to do that. I would say very good investment.
When Lekshe first received the sutra, she chanted it for 1 whole day.
Mm-hmm. Part of that is you just want it to roll off your tongue, and it's pretty hard to get Visarata, 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 and that long mantra to roll off your tongue. But also I learned on retreat, if you work for a sutra when you feel like it and when you don't, then when you don't feel like it, the sutra will work for you. It will give you something back. Same thing with so many practices. I'm sure I'm speaking, chanting to the choir on this one. So Shokan, can we see the words for that sutra and hear the music again? And you can get your chanting body aligned and get your airways open and really pour your heart into this, because every household in Portland and all around the world is waiting for you to come to the doorstep and bring your heart and your love and your mind to their illness and suffering.
Homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, thus that I hear at one time the Blessed One was residing in Adika at the impenetrable dwelling place. The Blessed One said to the Venerable Ananda, Ananda, let us proceed to the city of Vaiśali. Let us do so, O honored one, replied the Venerable Ananda, assenting to what the Blessed One had said. Thereupon the Blessed One, traveling through the country of Riji, arrived in Vaiśali. In Vaisali, he stayed in Amrapali's grove. At that time the Blessed One said to the Venerable Ananda, Ananda, go to the city of Vaisali, place your foot on the threshold of the city gate, and utter these mantras and these verses. Visarata, 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 Visarata. The Buddha who has compassion for the world has spoken. This is the wish of all Buddhas. It is the wish of all Pratyekya Buddhas. It is the wish of all Arhats. It is the wish of all those undergoing training. It is the wish of all Shravakas. It is the wish of all who speak words of truth. It is the wish of the Dharma. It is the wish of Kameshvara. It is the wish of Brahma. It is the wish of Pratyekya Brahma. It is the wish of Indra. It is the wish of the gods. It is the wish of the Lord of the dead. demigods, it is the wish of all demigods, it is the wish of the servants of the demigods, it is the wish of all Buddhas. Visarata, 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 the Buddha who has compassion for the world has spoken. Munchata, Munchata, do not stay, the epidemic should cease. Nirgachata, 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 the Buddha, the great God, the God of gods, the supreme God has arrived. The gods including Indra, the gods including Brahma, the gods including Ishana, the gods including Prajapati, and the four protectors of the world have come. Hundreds of thousands of gods, lords of the demigods, and hundreds of thousands of demigods have also come. Hundreds of thousands of Buddhas who have faith in the Blessed One have also come for the sake of all living beings, and they have come to bring great harm to you. So Nirgachata, 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 disperse quickly those of you who have hateful thoughts, may you be destroyed. Those who have loving thoughts, who do not wish to sin but wish to protect beings, stay and take on physical form. The Buddha who has compassion for the world has spoken. Sumo, 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 sumoro, 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 sumoro. Moro, 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 miri, 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 moro, 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 riti. Mire, 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 ti, esse mire, mire, ti, mire, si, mi. Kankara, kara, kata, kankara, kara, cha, kankara, 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 kankaro, titico, risho, kankara, kankari, shere, herita, fusware, pore, 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 punata, nana, ta, ripo, ripo, nata, ta, nergacha, nergacha, ripo, ripo, nergacha, palayata, ripo, ripo, palayata. The Buddha who has compassion for the world, whose wish is to benefit all living beings, who abides in love, who is compassionate, who abides in joy, and who abides in equanimity, has arrived. Sipram Nirgachata Swaha. These mantras which were proclaimed to all the gods and all the Buddhas through the Buddha's supreme wisdom and truth will accomplish their purpose. These following verses will accomplish their purpose. He in whom all attachment and greed are conquered, all defilement gone. His mind is peace without harmful intent. He will bring you well-being. He who leads all worldly beings to tread the path of liberation, the teacher of all dharmas, he will bring you well-being, the teacher support of wandering beings, for the sake of every living creature, brings them all to master happiness. He will bring you well-being, the protector who with thoughts of love, for all these beings sustains them always, just as he would his only child. He will bring you well-being, he who in samsara has been, for all samsaric beings a support, an island and a friend. He will bring you well-being, he who has laid bare all phenomena, who is pure and free from deception, whose words are pure, whose very acts are purity. He will bring you well-being, this great hero who by taking birth with perfection attained his purpose and accomplished all his goals. He will bring you well-being, he whose birthright is whole earth. With all his forests shook and trembled, brought joy for every living creature. He will bring you well-being, he who caused on the seed of awakening the earth to quake in all six ways, and Mara to feel despair. He will bring you well-being, he who turning the wheel of the Dharma pronounced the truth of the noble ones, and was exalted as a sage the Muni. He will bring you well-being, the alluring one who defeated all the extremists with the Dharma, and brought all assemblies under his influence. He will bring you well-being. May the Buddha bring you well-being. May Chakra and the gods bestow well-being. And may well-being from the Buddhas too be provided to you always by the Buddha's merit and power and the wishes of the gods. May whatever goal you seek this very day be accomplished. To like beings be well, for like beings be well. When you set out, be well, and when you return, be well. Be well in the daytime, be well in the night, be well at midday too. May all of you be always well. May all of you know no evil, surrounded by 1,000 gods. The Buddha has arrived, so you with hateful thoughts disperse, and you whose nature is compassion stay. By the power of the true words of the Buddhas, Pratikya Buddhas, Haras, and those being trained, those who do harm to the world should be gone from the city. All sentient beings, all living creatures, all Buddhas and every one of you, may you have nothing but happiness. May you all be free from illness. May you all see what is good. May all of you know no evil. May whatever Buddhas are assembled here, all those who live upon the earth or in the sky, act always lovingly for human beings and practice Dharma day and night. To these instructions the Venerable Ananda replied, I will do so, O honored one. He went to Vaiśali as the blessed one had instructed, and placing his foot on the threshold of the city, he gave uttered these mantras and these verses. Visarata, 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 Visarata.
Not sharing. Okay. So that is the Sutra, and it's 8:35. We are 5 minutes over. So Roshi, what do you want to do about questions? Shall we save them later for one-on-one meetings with people, or what do you
Well,
want
we
to
could
do?
take them now. I mean, people who need to leave, who have a time constraint,
Yeah.
could just say goodbye to everybody and exit as you wish. But I think we should stay around and take some questions.
Okay, let's do that. And remember with this chanting this, the more you chant, like every Zen chant you've ever done, this will unfold and you won't understand something. And then one day you'll be digging a turnip and suddenly you'll just know what something means. So do you have questions? Or comments or wisdom or knock jokes? How sweet is that? You sure you don't have a question? Now we're making time for the reflective thinkers who might need a while to form a question.
Did we put David to sleep?
Yeah, see? He said, oh, Visarata, somehow that rings a bell. So best wishes chanting this if you come. Oh, Pamela, you have a question on Tetsu. I'm so glad.
Well, it's not exactly a question. I just wanted to share that I've taken my phone and played this in our new Zendo here in Corvallis, and it's very empty, and so it echoes, and it has this beautiful sound. And so I need to leave and go look at the newsletter, but I hope that you all can come down and hear it in the Zendo here as well. It's really beautiful.
His voice is wonderful, isn't it? And we haven't tried chanting it without his voice. And he layers. You can, he's layered his voice, his own voice. So there's some of the harmonies that he brings in, subtle harmonies, are all his voice, which is very nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. I fell in love with this. Yeah, his voice, the harmonies. Yeah, I just fell in love with it. So thank you so much for this teaching. I really, really appreciate it.
Most welcome. Thank you for spreading it. May it fill your Zendo and fill your neighborhood and fill all of time and space.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Or I have something that I've been sort of thinking about. My landlord and I were discussing this, and he said something so interesting. He said he feels like the pandemic here in British Columbia and Canada, he feels like it's losing strength.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was, I didn't know what to make of that. And until I heard this chant and started reading this, it's kind of makes sense. Because we haven't had that many deaths, and people are not in hospital. I think we only have 8 people in ICU in British Columbia, whereas before we had a lot more at the start of the pandemic. So I think maybe there is something to that. And it gives me kind of hope through this chant and through this story that it's possibility that it will lose strength and will eventually just disperse. Thank you.
May that be so. May all of our obstacles disappear through the power of the Dharma.
Yeah.
And if even it helps us with our distress, which gets stirred up if you read the news.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a help to the world.
Yeah.
If we have more equanimity in this time of change. Yeah.
Even to just be more present with and flexible around all of this would be a healing of a kind, wouldn't it? We should take whatever we can get. Okay, so what we will do is send you again the links to the text, the commentary. I'll send you another translation, which is also quite nice, the Tibetan version of this, and a link to someone chanting it in Tibetan, in case that's your cup of tea, and a couple of other things I can't remember, but some little surprises in an email tomorrow. So watch for that, and thank you for your practice, and spread this wide and far.
And I'll send Amrapali's poem.
Oh, do, yeah.
About her aging, which is very sweet.
Yeah.
And also, I noticed in the Tibetan translation, the words, those of you who have hateful thoughts, may you be destroyed. That's actually changed to may you be overcome, I think it says, or may you be defeated. And so again, it's reflecting back on our thoughts and our ways of working with our thoughts.
Yeah.
So.
Usually in Tibetan that's said, may it be pacified, which means may it collapse back into emptiness. May it resolve, be liberated into space by virtue of the application of awareness. Yeah, its own medicine. Thank you so much for your company tonight. Thank you, Roshi, for telling us such wonderful stories.
Oh, thank you, Lekshe, for all your research into Buddhas.
See you later.
They're
everywhere. I know they're everywhere. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.